Hi, welcome back to our TEFL Online here in Glasgow. And if you were watching the plenary, you won't need me to tell you who this is, but if you weren't, it's Jane Setter from Reading University, isn't it? And you
Yes.
were doing a plenary, one of our first plenaries for many years on pronunciation.
Well, it was the first
The
ever
first in
pronunciation
51 years.
plenary. Yes,
Really?
yes, there hasn't been one before.
Yeah.
So I felt very honoured to be asked to do it, and when I realised it was the first one, I felt even more honoured. So, so it's good to get pronunciation out there.
Yeah, it is good to get pronunciation out there, yeah. Could you give us a brief summary of the main points for anyone who missed it? I mean, I know that's asking a lot without any visual aids and the microphone and the karaoke machine, but...
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean, it's something that worries teachers a lot. Pronunciation generally is something that worries teachers. Some teachers feel that because they don't have a native speaker accent, they're not a good model, for example. Some people are intimidated by pitch patterns and intonation contours. And I think our message generally is that we think a good model is somebody who has clearly spoken English in a variety of communicative settings, and that doesn't mean that you're a native speaker. If you're from Glasgow, for example, and have a very strong accent, you're not necessarily intelligible to people in other parts of the UK, let alone other parts of the world, and that could be said for a number of speakers from the British Isles, from the United States, so it doesn't mean because you're a native speaker you're necessarily a good model anyway.
yes, that's right.
And I was talking specifically about intonation, which is the thing that rarely gets addressed, and yeah, what we should focus on really. So that there is, if we focus on focus, so if we focus on placing the nucleus, that's somewhere that you can start. It's not pitch patterns, so it's not that kind of level of difficulty, and it's something which is very meaningful and helps people to get their messages over. So I think that's where teachers should be spending their time.
Yeah, and the nucleus basically is the most important content word in the question.
Yes,
in the
yes,
sentence.
in the sentence, yes.
Utterance,
So
I
if
should
yeah, so if you've got a straightforward, maybe the first sentence in an utterance, then it's likely to be on the stressed syllable of the last content word. And after that, it can be anywhere depending on context.
Yeah.
So depending on where the conversation goes, what it is the speakers want to react to and highlight, what new information they want to focus on.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how it works. It's something that can be taught from a logic point of view, so you can get people to sit down and work out where the nucleus should be based on a conversational context. And yeah, the work that I've done, the research that I've done, has actually shown that you can train it, and that students can learn how to produce it better.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, when I heard that you were doing a plenary on pronunciation, I expected there to be some phonemic chart in it and things like that.
Yes.
And I can remember from my sort of training on CELTA that, you know, the phonemic chart sort of produced fear in all of us as CELTA trainees. You know, the minute it came out, we were all kind of terrified. Oh no, they're getting out the phonemic chart again. You know, do you think? I mean, do you think the phonemic chart still has value these days, especially as most kind of dictionaries have online dictionaries have model pronunciations and things like that. Anyway, is it still going to be used?
Well, any teaching tool has validity if it's used right. And if it's used in a way that learners can understand it, or teachers can understand what they need to know in order to communicate effectively to their students what they need to know. Yes, I think it's useful. Consonants are actually very, very similar to spelling ones. So if we know how we would predict a certain consonant to sound in a normal, if you like, spelling context, not that English is particularly good at being normal, then consonants are on the chart are generally exactly what we'd expect. There's one or two different ones, like the sh and the j, for example. They're a different symbol that we don't see in spelling, but there's not too many of those. The trick is vowels, and if you teach vowels effectively, if you organise them in a way like Adrian Underhill's chart, for example, or the one that I saw recently from Roslyn, who was talking about that yesterday, if you organise the chart and use it effectively, then it doesn't have to be intimidating. But there are a lot of things on the chart, and if you bear in mind that there are 5 vowel letters, and also you can possibly count Y as a vowel in many contexts, but there's actually 20 vowels, 20 vowel sounds in the reference accent for British English. it can be intimidating. But if it's taught in a skillful way, it doesn't have to be.
I mean, I think, maybe one thing that came out of your talk was for non-native speakers of English, I think, who are often intimidated about teaching pronunciation, and I guess historically that's why the native speaker has been so popular in many schools, is that they think, oh well, if we get a native speaker, all our students will get good pronunciation. And that's something interesting that came out of the talk. So you don't think you need to be a native speaker to sort of teach good pronunciation?
No, I mean, good pronunciation is about being understood. And so if you have somebody who is an English as a lingua franca user, for example, to use Jennifer Jenkins' term, and you're clearly understood in a variety of settings, then you're as good a model as any. But it can depend on the learners, it can depend what the learners' targets are. I mean, for example, if I was learning Japanese, which I have done, I want to get as close to a native speaker accent as I can. If that's what the learner wants, then the learner needs to work on that with the help of whatever tools are available, whether that's from a teacher or from interacting with native speakers or from using online resources. It can be a very, very individual thing. But English is so widely spoken around the world, it's not always the case that native speakers are the target. It could be, right, Japanese speakers speaking to Spanish speakers. It's possible, so, those people need to be clearly understood through the medium of English. And if you can be, you're as good a model as any, as far as I'm concerned. But it does depend on what you want, what your personal preferences are, and what your target is.
And I mean, this thing about native speakers finding it very difficult to find those kind of intonation patterns and things like that, because I mean, you produce them subconsciously. When you start to sit down and think about them, it does become very difficult, and I think we don't realise how much misunderstanding comes from that as well. Those sort of getting the tone wrong.
Well, actually, from the point of view of the actual message content, if you get the intonation wrong, in inverted commas, and bear in mind there is a lot of possible variation in intonation, if you get it wrong there might be some confusion, but it's not desperate. The issues we have is that people don't recognise that there's a variety of different accents out there, and just because somebody's used a particular pattern, which might be something that's from another language they speak, their first language, for example, if they're a second language speaker, they might use a particular pattern which is used in a different way in English. So this might, in British English or American English or whichever variety, so you have a kind of preconceived idea of what these patterns mean, and you automatically infer from the speaker that they're using it in that sort of way. So the example I gave was this sort of dee-dee-dee pattern, which if I've used that usually in English means that I've tried to explain something a lot of times, or I've tried to do something a lot of times and I'm still not getting it right, or you're still not getting it right, so therefore come on, you're being a twit. But actually it doesn't mean that in all varieties. So you have to kind of realise that person isn't using that pattern in order to be annoying. They're using it because that's the pattern they've got. So it's kind of divorcing all of the affective stuff, if you like, the emotional stuff, and actually listening to see if you can work out what the message is. And
that can be very difficult to do as well. I mean, I know because my wife's a non-native speaker of English, but a very good speaker of English. But and a lot of basically the most misunderstandings we have come from these kind of things. It's just the tone is sort of slightly wrong, or the intonation slightly wrong, and we're kind of the message gets lost somewhere there.
Yes, but again, it's a contextual thing. So if you're in a context where you know this is an issue, then it's something that's worth working on.
Although maybe she just does assume that I am an idiot, and maybe she's right. So,
I won't go into that.
Too much information, really, isn't it? Okay. Well, thanks for coming along and telling us about the plenary, and I hope anyone who hasn't watched it yet will go and watch it. And thanks again. I hope it's not going to be the last one for the next 50 years, and we have another one soon.
Yes, I hope so too. Let's see.
Yeah, that's a heavy burden to carry, isn't it? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned in. We'll be along soon with another interview. Oh yeah, a whole group of people. So that should be interesting. We'll be back in a few minutes. Yeah.